Howdy, I'm Jammer. Well, I broke out the rainbow glasses again because it's June, which means June is Pride Month, and I suppose I have to hop on the bandwagon, let my freak flag fly, and remind everybody who's watching this channel that I identify as a queer man. I'm pansexual specifically. A friend of mine is a lesbian, and she and I have two things in common. One, we're both like hella gay. Two, she and I both have a real love and appreciation for the medium of comics. And recently she was coming over to my house to play with my dogs, chit chat, smoke some cigarettes out on my back porch. And she is always amazed by my little library here. I sort of rub my chest and be like, I do try. But she was really interested in just looking through it, and I casually brought up the topic of, I am not really that aware of very many comics or graphic novels, really, that have openly gay women as the protagonist, or more importantly, the key subject of the book in question. And then, as I kind of sort of dug into my book collection, because if there's one thing I love to do, it's pulling books off the shelf and form them into stacks, I began to realize, well, maybe is that entirely fair? For example, this collection here, No Straight Lines, which was edited by Justin Hall, is a series of comics by various queer authors, both men and a lot of women as well, and it deals with a lot of issues of lesbianism. This book here, Fun Home, a family tragicomic, and of course, Are You My Mother, is written by the gay goddess herself, Miss Alison Bechdel. And if there was ever a person on Earth who's gayer than Alison Bechdel, I'm really not aware of it. She's a lesbian. She identifies as a lesbian, and the first book, Fun Home, deals with her coming out as a lesbian. It's a key plot point of this graphic novel. And I just finished this one the other day, so I don't know why I'm not doing Fun Home. But whatever the case, moving on. There's also this book here, which is one that's a little more obscure, but Small Favors by Colleen Coover. This is a collection of lesbian pornographic comics by a woman who identifies as lesbian. It's frank in its depictions of sexuality. I do intend to review it at some point. Of course, that'll be an age-restricted video when I do. But this book celebrates lesbian sexuality and lesbian identity unabashedly and unashamedly. It's a beautiful book, and I definitely recommend you to check it out. Another really interesting example is My Lesbian Experience with Loneliness. This is a manga about a woman who's suffering from depression, and then also sort of suffering culturally and personally with her sexual identity. Now, I don't have enough time to get into the complexities inherent of homosexual identity in Japan. That's a lecture series unto itself. But this book was pretty unique in the fact it was one of the first mangas to get a lot of mainstream attention because the protagonist was a lesbian. Another book, which you probably have heard about, for good reasons or not, is Blue is the Warmest Color. This, fun fact, was eventually translated, turned into a motion picture which won the Palme d'Or at Cannes several years ago. I and a lot of lesbians and queer people in general have a lot of particular opinions about that film, but before you completely write it off, the book is a beautiful exploration of lesbianism. And while there are some aspects of The Love That Dare Not Speak Its Name in this book, this was still a really important book to address lesbian identity in our current age. And then we have two more examples in my little stack here. When I Arrived at the Castle by Emily Carroll is an interesting book, and while it doesn't necessarily focus explicitly on lesbianism itself, it is still an interesting book which explores same-sex intimacy between women. And then finally, this one's a tiny bit of a soft example, but over the entire course of its career, the Wonder Woman comic, or the Wonder Woman comic book, has sort of here and there touched on the sort of implied lesbianism or same-sex desire of the character of Diana Prince. In fact, this run, the New 52 run, which was done by Brian Azzarello, which was an amazing run from the start, it was immediately followed by a writer who explored this dynamic. Granted, that writer was a man and straight, and there was a little bit too much male gaze in it for my particular taste. But whatever, there's always been that element in Wonder Woman, and that itself is its own series of lectures. Point being, Wonder Woman is a character which is here and there represented sort of female queer longing and existence and identity in a really interesting and, most importantly, commercial and mainstream format. Okay, so that's a lot of comics about lesbians. How can I sit here with a straight face and say that there aren't that many comics about lesbians? Well, you'll note this stack isn't that high. Whereas if I were to stack every book by Marvel and DC and Fantagraphics and Drawn and Quarterly and Top Shelf, it would be conservatively 400 me's stacked on top of each other. This isn't that much, and this is only the books that I've been able to track down. That's why I say again, it's kind of frustrating to observe how many books there are about queer women, or just about queer people, in relation to the great body of work that's out there. Which then brings me, of course, to the book I'm going to talk about today, which is one of my favorite books of all time, Laura Dean Keeps Breaking Up With Me. This is arguably one of my favorite books. I've been waiting to do this video to talk about it because this book, better than just about any other book I've really encountered, really tackles what it's like to be a young woman today, what it's like to be a lesbian today, and then simply have such a really solid queer representation without eventually merging or melting into melodrama. So, with that long introduction in place, I hope you really appreciate the fact that this book is one of my favorites, and I'm really excited to talk about it today. I mean, always excited, but I'm really excited about this one. So, no more dancing about. Let's get to it. Okay, so what is Laura Dean Keeps Breaking Up With Me about? The story is about a young woman by the name of Freddie Riley. She's Asian American, specifically from a mixed-race family, and she, as the title suggests, keeps breaking up, or technically speaking, gets broken up with by her emotionally abusive girlfriend, Laura Dean. A woman in high school who's, well, picture the stereotypical high school queen. She's attractive and popular and, well, kind of a jerk, actually a giant jerk. The book basically revolves around Freddie continually getting dumped by Laura Dean, but then sort of hopping back into a relationship with this woman every single time Laura sends her a text or just randomly shows up at her house, what have you. The book is about Freddie's abusive relationship with this young woman, and at the same time, the effects it has upon her immediate interpersonal relationship with her friends, most of whom are gay and nerds and, air quote, losers. But more important than that is the way that this emotionally abusive relationship basically saps at Freddie's personal sense of self, her personal feeling of security or insecurity therein, and then also just basically how this relationship manifests in a lot of behavior that hurts the people in terms of her family and her friends. This book is really beautiful visually, but it's also a really interesting study about emotionally abusive relationships and the way it can basically work on your self-esteem. Again, having just recently gotten divorced and having been in an emotionally abusive relationship, this book tends to strike a pretty solid chord with me as an individual reader. But even if you haven't been in an emotionally abusive relationship, this book will help you dramatically in understanding how difficult relationships like this can be. The book ultimately ends with, again as always, spoilers on this. I'll give you 2 seconds. Okay, that was more than 2. Alright, if you're still here, the book ultimately ends with Freddie realizing what she has done when her friend Doodle has to get an abortion because she's been sleeping with a married man. After this event in question, Freddie begins to realize, oh my gosh, I've been a terrible friend. I need to break up with Laura Dean because when I'm with her, I'm a bad girlfriend and I'm a bad human being. This isn't good for me and it's not good for the people around me. So the book ultimately culminates in her breaking up with Laura Dean and then finding her sense of self-esteem again. If I have not said it enough already, this book is absolutely worth your time in terms of the story alone. It is an excellent representation of queer identity, particularly queer teen identity, which is another thing to bring up. This is a First Second book, a company who I'm falling in love, more and more in love with day by day, because their books tend to be stylistically gorgeous and narrative. In terms of their narratives, it's absolutely stunning. It's almost like one excellent book after another. And, most importantly, we have to discuss the fact that, like I mentioned before, Freddie, technically speaking, is from a mixed-race family. Her father is white, her mother is Asian. So, we have to understand that the protagonist of this book is a queer Asian woman. If I had to sit down and make a list of protagonists in graphic novels who happen to identify as lesbian and or queer, who is also Asian, I can only come up with this one book. And so this book is really important for the fact that it's an opportunity to observe a non-white lesbian existence, which is something that's damn difficult to track down, even in terms of most mainstream publications. Laura Dean is a beautiful example from an excellent publication company, and this book is 100% worth your time. But now, let's dig into the comics themselves, because if you think I've been geeking out already, oh boy, just you wait. Alright. First off, I know what you're going to say. The title of the book is Vampires and Violets, Lesbian in Films. It's a prose book, so it's not really a comic book, but like I said, it's really hard to find sometimes books about lesbian identity, or more realistically speaking, books that are not ungodly academic books or just porn, okay? So when you find a book like this, you show it off because people need to know about it. It's nothing but lesbians in film, how they've been represented, both by female directors, male directors, and what are some notable lesbian films that are worth your time. I bring this one up because it's there, it's not a comic book, but I definitely think you should check this one out. It's a gorgeous read. Now, let's get to the comics, because if I haven't sold you on my love for Laura Dean, or excuse me, Laura Dean Keeps Breaking Up With Me already, hopefully this next part will, because one need only open up a single page of this book and just be sort of awestruck by just the design, the colors, the arrangement of the panels. I'm a big fan of chill pop and lo-fi chill pop, like the one video of the young woman who's like writing in her book or cats in the window and they're playing like kind of techno rap all the time. This book is more or less that, but as a comic book, but at the same time there's such a careful attention to every single page. Some comic books that I've read will mostly be talking heads or basically talking physiques. Laura Dean Keeps Breaking Up With Me is as much a mood as it is an actual physical book itself. And one of the joys of reading this book is just taking the time to really stop and look at the way that the author, and I'm horrified that it's taken me this time to remind or let you know that Mariko Tamaki and Rosemary Valero O'Connell are the beautiful people who gave us this book. I'm sorry, please forgive me. Anyway, can you see why my wife left me? No, kidding. Bad joke. Basically, the visuals of this book are just one of the highest selling points of it, because if the story doesn't sell you on it, this book is gorgeous just to open up and look upon a single panel, or to just watch the way that Tamaki and Valero O'Connell move you through this book. One of the overall sensations, and this is probably an excellent page to demonstrate, is the fact that where the previous page will have bits of dialogue, Tamiko and Valero O'Connell are really good in the way they use silence as a narrative structure. There will be long moments of conversation immediately followed up with long, empty blankness to really emphasize the emotional impact of the dialogue or the narration that has just gone through. As Freddie takes you through this story, which is largely, I forgot to mention this in the summation of the narrative, but the book is largely sort of told as Freddie writing a series of emails to sort of like a newspaper, advice dispenser. Picture like Dear Abby mixed with Dan Savage. Which, as soon as I picture that, I'm like, where is that queen, and how do I get his phone number? But anyway, Freddie writes these emails, and actually looking at the passage I just opened up to, it's actually really interesting, just this one passage here. It starts off with her walking home from school. The hardest part of all this, aside from the astounding fact that being dumped feels like food poisoning, is the fact that I'm always losing a person who was just there, like she's gone, but she's not gone. I can still smell her deodorant on my sheets. I can still text her. As somebody who's just gotten out of a divorce, and even you, the viewer, has probably been through a relationship of some kind or other, breakups suck for a whole host of reasons, but arguably one of the most difficult aspects of them is the separation from another person. This page is gorgeous for the way it sets up the feeling of a place and the sort of severe absence. Freddie is seemingly almost always alone in these panels. It's very rare that you actually see her situated with another human being. And so the authors are really good here in demonstrating her emotional isolation and how being sort of in and out of this emotionally abusive situation is tremendously isolating. If you've ever been with an abuser, one of the things that happens to you is over time, you begin to sort of, I won't say grow comfortable in that isolation, but it becomes the norm. And so the absence at that moment sometimes feels profound, and at the same time it feels relieving. You're aware of that person being gone from your life, but at the same time, it's still nevertheless really difficult to sort of navigate that absence and, well, seeming continual presence. Now, again, I've said a lot about the visual structure of this book. Looking at this page, we see Freddie narrating to a medium, or basically a palm reader, how she got involved with Laura Dean in the first place. Freddie says square dancing, which becomes kind of its own sort of interesting visual metaphor of having to continually dance in this relationship. But we're able to see what's really powerful about this graphic novel is the panel layouts. They aren't just like even spreads of grids. The story doesn't feel like a grid structure at all. This story feels just kind of random, woven all about the place, with small instances of physical and emotional contact sort of just continually drawing us in. If you want to talk about visual language, like I did in a previous video with Scott McCloud's Understanding Comics, you can see it in this book. Again, Tomiko and Valero O'Connell, and I have to keep looking at the cover because I keep forgetting their names. I'm a horrible human being. Please forgive me for that. But these two artists know, they seem to bleed on every page, the understanding and, more importantly, the conviction that comics has a language that can be really effective when employed correctly. And just flip me, they do this book in spades. Now, another really interesting aspect of that is, again, the aspect of sort of emotional detachment. One of the continual points of tension is not just Laura Dean's continual emotional abuse and basically infidelities, it's also the way that Freddie hurts her friends, and her immediate friends, say Buddy, and this character here, Doodle. This character is continually trying to get Freddie's attention, to share her life with Freddie, but Freddie's always distracted with text from Laura Dean. This single page right here is really interesting because we're able to observe the way how Doodle is trying to communicate to Freddie, and then by the end of it, they sort of come to the realization that, okay, I'm basically out of the immediate realm of attention. And as always, we're followed up by this beautiful 2 panels of silence. This book is just gorgeous for the way it sort of continually reveals emotional complexity. Now, there was another passage I really wanted to talk about, which is, I've addressed the issue of silence already in several instances, but I also really wanted to talk about here where Freddie finally goes to talk to her friend Doodle, who reveals the fact that she's pregnant. If you really look at this page, there's not that many word balloons. There really isn't. A great amount of weight to this book is the visual cues that the reader is given. So one of the reasons why, even though this is like, I believe it's somewhere close to about a 300-page book, it doesn't feel that long reading it. This book moves pretty quickly, and the first time I read it, I've actually read it about 3 times now, I was kind of amazed at how quickly it went. I was like, did I miss something? Am I just reading it too quickly? It's not. It's just that, again, the visuals tend to be the strength. And again, what's really beautiful about this book is the way the colors, or specifically the color pink, continually works against the sort of black, whites, and grays of the text. I honestly couldn't tell you right now whether or not I believe that's an intentional rhetorical effect, but it still works as one nevertheless. The reader is just again and again and again sort of washed in this pink and then thrown back into the black and the white. It follows kind of like the emotional upheaval of continually being broken up with. And of course, my page marker actually fell out while I was trying to narrate. Oh, never mind. I found it. Huh. It wasn't the page I thought it was. One more sort of really important thing I really want to talk about, more than just the color and the beautiful visual language and just the wonderful arc that this story gives its reader, is the opportunity to reflect on sort of contemporary LGBTQ plus existence. Because if you don't know anything about the history of the queer community, oh boy, there's whole courses dedicated to it. And if I can rotate my camera over here to the side, this is just merely one out of several books in my collection entirely dedicated to the history of the queer population. TLDR, it hasn't always been pleasant. Case in point, say the 1950s, where if you openly identified as gay, it's my dog Sonia, you could be potentially thrown into a mental hospital where you could be the victims of experimentation, torture, lobotomy, chemical castration. Google it. It's really fun. What's interesting about this book is a small remark made near the very opening, where Freddie is sort of discussing with the person she's emailing the sort of complicated nature of her situation. She notes, "Of course I know there are LGBTQIA activists out there who fought for centuries for me to have the right to fuck up like this. I'm aware that I should be grateful that I have the ability to get broken up with and publicly humiliated the same as my hetero friends. I am progress." I really love that line because it's one of these weird, sort of odd dynamic moments where you can kind of see the next generation of queer people basically assuming the mantle, picking up the torch, pick your metaphor. Those few panels there are really good at conveying the fact that queer existence is becoming just another facet of your identity. There still seems to be a self-awareness in Freddie in the fact that she's aware of who has come before, what fights have been fought, and what rights does she as an individual possess. She's a young woman who understands, okay, I'm attracted to other women, and socially speaking, it's mostly okay to most of the population. But she also observes that she feels bad for the fact that she is an aspect of progress. She's like, I know I should be on some level happy that I can have a bad relationship and that's normal. At the same time, it's an opportunity to reflect on the fact that queer existence is not being simplified by any means. It's just, again, gaining more complexity, because now we can have a story in which we can observe that even people in the LGBTQ plus population deal with internalized hatred and also deal with emotionally and sometimes physically abusive relationships. That's a facet that's really important because, again, you don't have to be straight to appreciate the difficult story that is Freddie's. She likes Laura Dean, or she seems to like what Laura Dean represents and gives her personally. But ultimately, by the end of the book, she has a difficult decision to make. Do I stay in this relationship that is hurting me and the people around me, or do I realize that I'm worth it, that I'm important, and that I don't deserve to be treated this way? This is one of the reasons, again, why I love this book. Not simply just because I've gotten out of a bad relationship, but because there are lots of people who have been in bad relationships like this. And being queer is no longer just a unique facet of it. Everybody in any manner of romantic relationship runs the risk of falling into the trap of becoming a victim of abuse. And so what's beautiful about Laura Dean Keeps Breaking Up With Me is it's a chance to reflect on that kind of relationship structure and reflect on the fact that a new generation of queer kids don't feel that they have to be in a relationship with someone of the same sex just because in the past it hasn't been easy to be in a same-sex relationship. Now, you can just be in a relationship and hopefully, at the very end, realize what is the difference between a healthy, positive relationship, say the relationship with her and her friends, and what is a toxic relationship. All right, I think I'm going to end it there. Thank you so much for watching. As always, I tremendously appreciate it. Just endless heart and love to you. I appreciate it so much. As always, please like, share, and subscribe. All that jazz. It helps me know that you're watching these, that you're enjoying these videos, and also it kind of compels me to keep making them. So if you're enjoying these, please like, share, and subscribe. Do whatever you can. Feel free to comment in the comment section below. Also, when it comes to Laura Dean Keeps Breaking Up With Me, as always, check out your local comic book shop. First Second is a comic book company. They tend to be kind of a little bit more mainstream or sort of more niche. Sometimes it kind of bounces back and forth. Nevertheless, a lot more comic retailers are beginning to realize the importance and potential of books like this because the YA market is, one, extraordinarily lucrative right now because there's a lot of kids this age who want to feel represented in books. But then also as well, comic book shops are... The sort of open-mindedness of comic book shops is its own manner of lecture. But if you have a comic book shop like mine, everybody's welcome. And if you are a young lesbian or a person of color and you want to see yourself represented in a book that you're reading, go into your shop, see if they've got a copy, or see if they'll order you a copy. And again, if your local comic book shop doesn't exist or they don't have it and they can't order it, don't forget to check out your local public library. Because if they don't have it, they probably have an interlibrary loan system where they can get it for you. And I think that's everything I can think of. If I haven't given you enough reason to demonstrate that I'm just like high-key obsessed with this book, I don't know what else will do it except go out, read this comic, read some comics. Thanks for watching.